His name is Richard Kuklinski, but they call him the Iceman.
The Iceman? Keep investigating.
He coached his daughter's sports teams on weekends. He barbecued with his neighbors on summer evenings. He drove his kids to school. He went to church. He paid his taxes. And in between all of that, he killed people for money. Richard Kuklinski was, by every outward measure, the perfect American family man. A big guy, 6'4", 270 pounds, who lived in a modest house on a quiet street in Dumont, New Jersey. His wife, Barbara, thought he was a businessman. His neighbors thought he was a little intimidating, sure, but harmless. His daughters adored him. None of them had any idea. Because behind the barbecues and the school runs and the Sunday church services, Richard Kuklinski was working as one of the most prolific and feared contract killers the American Mafia had ever employed. A man who killed with guns, knives, crossbows, ice picks, and cyanide. A man who froze the bodies of his victims to confuse investigators. A man who claimed with a completely straight face to have murdered over 200 people. A man the press would come to call the Iceman. This is his full story. To understand Richard Kuklinski, you have to understand where he came from. Because nobody is born a killer. They are made into one. And the people who made Richard Kuklinski were the very people who were supposed to protect him. Richard Leonard Kuklinski was born on April 11, 1935 in Jersey City, New Jersey. He was the second of 5 children, born to Stanley and Anna Kuklinski, a deeply troubled household from the very beginning. Stanley Kuklinski was a railroad brakeman who drank heavily and ruled his home with his fists. Anna, a devout Catholic, worked long hours at a local meatpacking plant just to keep the family afloat. The beatings were a regular part of life in the Kuklinski household. Not occasional discipline, regular, brutal, systematic violence. Stanley would come home drunk and take out his rage on whoever was closest. The children learned quickly to stay out of his way, but they couldn't always manage it. One night when Richard was just a small boy, his father beat his older brother Florian so severely that the boy died from his injuries. The official cause of death was recorded as a fall down the stairs. Stanley Kuklinski was never charged. The family never spoke of it again. That moment, that erasure of justice, that silence where accountability should have been, burrowed itself into Richard Kuklinski's psyche and never left. He grew up, learning that violence was the language of power, that the strong did what they wanted, and the weak suffered it. That nobody was coming to save you, and that if you wanted to survive in this world, you needed to become the most dangerous thing in the room. By the time he was a teenager, Richard Kuklinski was already a terrifying presence on the streets of Jersey City. Tall, broad, and seething with a cold, quiet rage that made other kids instinctively back away from him. He wasn't the kind of boy who picked fights for fun. He was the kind who finished them permanently. At the age of 14, Richard Kuklinski committed his first murder. The victim was a local bully named Charlie Lane, a boy who had made Kuklinski's life miserable on the streets of their neighborhood. One evening, Kuklinski waited for him. He beat Lane to death with a wooden curtain rod. Then methodically, he cleaned himself up, disposed of the weapon, and went home. He felt nothing. That absence of feeling, that emotional void where guilt and horror should have lived, was the foundation of everything that came after. Kuklinski later said in interviews that after that first killing, he realized he was different from other people, that the thing inside most humans that makes violence feel wrong, that creates revulsion and remorse, simply wasn't there in him. He wasn't proud of that. He wasn't troubled by it either. It was simply a fact, the way eye color is a fact. He had discovered a tool that other people were afraid to use, and in the years that followed, he would learn to use it with extraordinary precision. Through his teenage years and into his early 20s, Kuklinski drifted through the criminal underworld of New Jersey and New York. He ran with street gangs. He committed robberies. He got into fights, many fights, and he always won, because he fought without mercy and without hesitation. Two qualities that are almost impossible to defend against. He began to attract attention, not from law enforcement, not yet, but from the kind of people who were always looking for someone exactly like Richard Kuklinski. Someone who could handle problems quietly. Someone who didn't crack under pressure. Someone who could do what needed to be done, and then go home and eat dinner without losing his appetite. The Mafia noticed him. In the late 1950s, Kuklinski began working on the fringes of the New York and New Jersey underworld. He ran illegal pornography for various criminal enterprises, pirated films distributed through a network of contacts across the tri-state area. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid, and more importantly, it put him in contact with made men from the 5 families. The man who would change his life was Roy DeMeo. DeMeo was a soldier in the Gambino crime family, one of the most feared and productive earners in the entire organization. He ran a crew out of the Flatlands neighborhood in Brooklyn that was responsible for hundreds of murders, a massive stolen car operation, and a pornography distribution network that stretched across the eastern seaboard. DeMeo was brilliant, creative, and absolutely merciless. When Kuklinski fell behind on payments related to a pornography deal, DeMeo sent men to deliver a message, a beating that left Kuklinski bruised but, crucially, not broken. What impressed DeMeo wasn't just that Kuklinski took the punishment without crying out or begging. It was the look in his eyes afterward. No fear, no anger, just a cold, patient assessment. DeMeo saw something in Richard Kuklinski that he recognized immediately, because he had it himself, and he brought him in. The audition came shortly after. DeMeo and Kuklinski were driving through a park when DeMeo suddenly gestured toward a man walking his dog along a path. A complete stranger, a man who had done nothing wrong, who had no connection to anything, who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Kill him," DeMeo said. Without hesitation, Kuklinski got out of the car, walked up behind the man, and shot him in the back of the head. Then he climbed back into the car, as calmly as if he'd just stepped out to buy a newspaper. He was hired. From that moment, Kuklinski became an invaluable asset to the DeMeo crew and, through them, to the broader Gambino organization. He was not a made man. He was not Italian, and the rules of La Cosa Nostra required Italian heritage for full membership. But he was something arguably more useful. A freelance contractor who could be deployed against any target, from any family, without the political complications that came with using a made member. He became what the mob called a one-man army, a problem solver, a finisher, and over the next 25 years he was very, very good at his job. Here is where the story of Richard Kuklinski gets complicated, because there are 2 versions of the Iceman: the man the evidence supports, and the legend the man himself created. In prison, Kuklinski gave interviews to psychiatrists, criminologists, journalists, and documentary filmmakers. He was articulate, chilling, and enormously compelling on camera. He described murders in vivid detail: the weapons, the locations, the methods, the conversations he'd had with victims in their final moments. He claimed to have killed anywhere from 100 to 200 people. He claimed to have participated in some of the most famous hits in Mafia history, including the murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in 1985, and the disappearance of Teamsters president Jimmy Hoffa. The problem is that almost none of it checks out. Law enforcement investigators who spent years working the Kuklinski case, men who knew his world intimately and had every incentive to believe him, because corroborating his claims would have meant closing dozens of cold cases, couldn't verify a single one of his additional claimed murders beyond the 5 he was convicted of. The truth, as best as investigators could reconstruct it, was this: Richard Kuklinski was a genuinely dangerous and prolific killer. He was convicted of 5 murders. He almost certainly committed others. The real number probably falls somewhere between 15 and 30, enough to make him one of the most productive contract killers of his era, but nowhere near the mythological figure he presented himself as. So why did he exaggerate so dramatically? The answer, those who studied him believe, lies in Kuklinski's psychology. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life being invisible, compartmentalizing, hiding, performing normalcy. Prison stripped all of that away. He had no more secrets to protect. His family already knew what he was. The only thing he had left was the story. And Richard Kuklinski, it turned out, was a man who understood instinctively that a bigger story was a better story. He became, in his final years, the author of his own mythology, and he did it brilliantly. By the early 1980s, Kuklinski had been operating as a contract killer for over 2 decades. He had never been arrested for murder. He had never been seriously investigated. As far as law enforcement was concerned, he was a peripheral figure, a small-time pornography distributor, with some vague connections to organized crime. But the bodies were beginning to pile up in ways that couldn't be ignored. The discovery of Louis Masgay's frozen body in 1983 caught the attention of the New Jersey State Police. The ice crystals in the tissue, the bizarre timeline. The fact that Masgay had apparently been looking to do business with someone in the criminal underworld before his disappearance, investigators began pulling threads. Around the same time, the disappearances of several other men connected, however loosely, to the same circles began to create a pattern. A pattern that investigators started to attach, carefully and tentatively, to the name Richard Kuklinski. They didn't have enough for an arrest. What they had were suspicions, circumstantial connections, and the growing conviction that this large, quiet man from Dumont, New Jersey was far more dangerous than he appeared. They decided to go undercover. The operation was a joint effort between the New Jersey Attorney General's office and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The undercover operative they chose was ATF Special Agent Dominic Polifrone, a man who had spent years working deep inside the New Jersey underworld and knew how to move through that world convincingly. Polifrone was introduced to Kuklinski through Phil Solomon, a local Mafia associate, and, crucially, one of the only people Richard Kuklinski had ever allowed himself to be genuinely close to. Solomon had agreed to help the ATF. He would later say that he made that choice because he believed Kuklinski was eventually going to kill him too. Getting close to Kuklinski was not easy. He was deeply suspicious of new people by nature. He kept his distance, observed carefully, tested the ground before he put any weight on it. Polifrone had to spend months hanging around the storefront where Solomon and his associates conducted their business, essentially playing a waiting game, being seen and accepted as a familiar face before Kuklinski would consider meeting him. The call finally came one day through Solomon. "The big guy wants to know if he can meet you." They met at a Dunkin' Donuts. Polifrone would later describe that first meeting as one of the most chilling experiences of his professional life. Kuklinski arrived wearing orange-tinted glasses, massive and completely still in the way that very dangerous people often are. He studied Polifrone carefully. He asked questions that were designed to expose inconsistencies in a cover story. He was, even in a donut shop, terrifying, but Polifrone held his ground. And Kuklinski, satisfied enough, decided he could be useful. Over the following months, Polifrone worked his way deeper into Kuklinski's confidence. He posed as a fellow criminal, a man with connections, with problems, with money. He talked about needing things handled. He listened because Kuklinski, once he trusted someone, liked to talk. The critical moment came when Kuklinski demonstrated his cyanide technique. He explained to Polifrone, who was wearing a wire, exactly how liquid cyanide worked as a murder weapon. The spray bottle, the boost, the speed of death, the way it mimicked cardiac arrest. He talked about it with the casual expertise of a tradesman discussing his tools. That recording sealed his fate. On December 17, 1986, as Kuklinski pulled into a truck stop on the New Jersey Turnpike for what he believed was a meeting with Paulie Frone about a contract killing. The operation closed in. Agents swarmed the vehicle. Richard Kuklinski, who had evaded law enforcement for over 2 decades, was arrested without incident. Paulie Frone, telling the story years later, described the moment the tapes were played in court. Kuklinski's wife and daughters, who had come to support him, ran out of the courtroom. They couldn't believe it was him. The voice, the words, the calm, clinical discussion of poison and murder. The judge, after the verdict, looked at Kuklinski and asked him directly, "Why did you do it?" Kuklinski met his gaze without flinching. "It was business," he said. Richard Kuklinski was convicted in 1988 of 4 murders and sentenced to consecutive life terms, meaning he would never leave prison. In 2003, he pleaded guilty to a 5th murder, the 1980 killing of NYPD detective Peter Calabro, and received an additional 30 years. He would spend the rest of his life in Trenton State Prison. So what do we make of Richard Kuklinski? Monster, certainly. The 5 murders he was convicted of were not the crimes of a man acting under pressure or in the grip of passion. They were cold, calculated, and entirely without remorse. Whatever the true total of his victims, each one of them was a human being with a life, a family, people who loved them. That fact, buried under the mythology and the documentary footage in the Hollywood film, is the fact that matters most. But Kuklinski is also something more complicated than a simple monster.
He is a window into the world of organized crime, a world that creates and exploits men like him, chewing them up in service of profit and then discarding them when they become liabilities. And he is, in his final chapter, a study in the human need for significance. For a man who had lived his entire life in shadow, invisible, compartmentalized, playing a role, the prison interviews were the first time Richard Kuklinski was truly seen. The first time the truth of who he was could be spoken aloud, and he made the most of that moment, expanding and embellishing until the truth had become legend. Was he the most feared hitman in Mafia history? Almost certainly not. Was he a genuinely dangerous man who killed multiple people for money and lived an extraordinary double life for over 2 decades? Absolutely. Was he, in some dark and troubling way, a master storyteller who understood, better than most, the power of a well-crafted narrative? Look at us, still talking about him. You decide.
Hey neighbors, beautiful day.
Hi everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, good to see you.
Doing great, thanks. That's my girl, great hustle. Keep your eye on the ball. You got this, champ. This is the best meal.
We're so happy, Dad.
I hope they're okay.